Hi, I'm Bill Wilson. I'll be back in just a moment with Arthur Jones and another exciting adventure on Capture. My week is never complete without a new adventure of Capture with Arthur Jones, and I'm sure you look forward to it just as I do. And Arthur has promised us a great new adventure this week. Arthur, where are we going?
Bill, in the last half of last week's episode, as you know, we had moved to Suriname, or Dutch Guiana, in the northwestern portion of South America, actually more the north-central portion of South America. And this week we take you back to Suriname for a completely different type of episode on this series. Now, on this particular trip, we were looking for and did encounter and capture an extremely large number of adult spectacled caiman, among other very interesting wildlife.
Well, that sounds like one we won't want to miss. Let's join Arthur Jones right now on Capture.
Our business at this time, Bill, in Suriname, or Dutch Guiana as it's more commonly called here in this country, actually was a search for an area where we could locate, capture, and remove a large number of adult spectacled caiman, a type of crocodilian. But while researching the area, looking for a good spot to catch the caiman, during the first few days, we also had a number of interesting encounters with other types of local wildlife. Now, one of the Indian boys, and when I say Indian, I mean a person descended from people coming from India rather than an American Indian, and Liza simultaneously encountered a couple of local types of snakes. The Indian boy was involved at this time with a rather large adult red-tailed South American boa constrictor, and Liza was involved simultaneously with a medium-sized specimen of rather yellow-tailed crebo, the South American indigo snake. Now, the crebo, of course, is harmless, as is the boa, and although the boa has bigger teeth, more of them, and a bigger mouth, the crebo actually will give a much worse bite. Now, on this particular occasion, Roy was more or less overseeing the project here. Actually, at that point, I think he was more concerned with trying to assist Liza, and the Indian boy, not being as experienced or not being as capable, perhaps, as he thought he was with the boa, momentarily found himself a slight bit outclassed. Now, one thing I'd like to make very clear about this, Bill, is the fact that this man was attacking the snake. The snake was not attacking him. Under no circumstances, except in very rare cases, will a snake of any kind attack a human being. In this particular instance, the snake was merely defending himself. The man attacked the snake, and the snake did the natural thing and attempted to get loose. And in so doing, being a constrictor, of course, and due to the fact that the man was restraining him by the head, he had no other choice than to throw coils around the man's neck. Now, this could lead to a person being killed. In fact, here in this country, in Florida, within the last 3 or 4 years, a friend of mine was killed by a python. But it was more or less a similar type of situation. He had the snake in a cage. He was taking it out. The snake became alarmed. He attempted to restrain it. The snake was too big, and he simply couldn't handle it, and being by himself, he was overcome and killed by the snake. Now, you may recall some time back, we showed you some films of Liza's hands at a time when she was handling monkeys and was bitten by a marmoset. Now, at the time, not having a doctor in attendance, she did a little practical surgery on herself here and put about 30 stitches in her finger. Although these stitches were rather small, and 5 or 6 properly spaced and properly sized stitches would probably have done the job, the end result worked out quite well, and the finger has now healed up almost completely without a scar. Now, in this particular area, of course, we and the natives also collect babies, but at the time we were concerned with adults. Now, while the true alligator, the black with yellow marking American alligator, attains quite a large size, on occasion a length of even more than 12 feet. The spectacled caiman is a much smaller animal. Their maximum size seems to be about 7.5 or 8 feet, and a typical adult is about 4.5 or 5 feet. at the time, we were primarily concerned with the adults, wishing to bring about 300 or 400 of these back to this country as a basic supply for the start of an exhibit in Florida. Now, locating caiman is no great problem. These are found in large numbers in any number of places in South America. But locating them under circumstances where they can readily be taken out of a swamp and brought back to this country, that's some other problem. Now, the advantage in this section of Suriname was that we were staying at this time on a large plantation operated by a company from Holland where they are producing rice in tremendous quantity. By the way, Liza's father is operating the dusting service and the planting service using aircraft there. The farm is operated almost completely by aircraft, and we were able, because of the connection thereby afforded, we were able to obtain local transportation to make it possible to remove these animals to this country. And as I've mentioned in the past many times, the whole secret to the animal business, of course, is transportation. There are many places in the world that you can go and easily or otherwise capture animals of various kinds. But then it becomes completely impossible to remove those animals from the country and bring them back to this country, or at least it's impossible to do so with any degree of economic feasibility. The advantage in northwestern Suriname, especially because of our connections there, was that the animals were not only locally available, but they were rather readily located close to suitable transportation. Now, one of the people viewing this film the first time it was ever edited remarked that we were harassing the animals at this point. And this, of course, is a natural misunderstanding. We were not harassing the animals. We were attempting to get them into a position to make it possible to lay hands on them. Now, all types of crocodilians are extremely fast-moving, and this is especially so of medium-sized specimens. And the caiman falls in a range of size among crocodilians that makes him one of the most difficult to lay hands upon, although he is found in such numbers that he's rather easily locatable, and therefore they are captured in larger numbers than any other type of crocodilian. Nevertheless, once you locate him, he's one of the most difficult types to actually lay hands on. The problem here, of course, that Roy was having was attempting to get the animal to look in the other direction so that he could reach down and grasp him by the back of the neck. And the use of the stick, of course, if you'll notice very carefully, as he and the native boys assisting him here were doing, the use of the stick is an attempt to get the caiman to turn and look in the opposite direction long enough that he can pounce upon him and grab him by the back of the neck. An animal of this size is not difficult to handle if you're able to get a hold of him, but reaching down with your bare hands and grabbing him is a good way to lose a hand. Now, eventually, having succeeded with their own, of course there were 2 of the native boys involved in the actual catch and several others standing by ready to give assistance, and once they had succeeded in sacking their own first catch, then one of the boys came over and momentarily detracted the caiman that Roy was working with for a length of time sufficient to make it possible for him to grab the animal while its attention was in another direction. As I mentioned a moment ago, once you lay hands on them, it's rather easy to handle. One of the interesting things, by the way, that turned up in this particular hunt was the fact that a great number of these caiman had regenerated tails. Now, any number of different types of reptiles, especially lizards, have the ability to grow back or to regenerate a portion of their tail if it's broken off. And although it is not commonly known, even some of the crocodilians have this ability. Now, they do not have this ability to the degree that the lizards or certain other types of reptiles do. Certain of your reptiles, certain of the lizards, I should say, can break their tail off and almost completely regrow a new tail. There will be a difference in color, there will be a difference in consistency of the skin and of the scales, but for all practical purposes, they will regrow about 60 to 80% of the original tail, and do so efficiently enough that the average person looking at the tail will not even be aware that it has ever been broken off and regrown. Now, it is not commonly known, but certain types of crocodilians have this ability as well, or perhaps I should say all crocodilians have this ability. And one of the unusual things about the caiman from this particular section was the fact that a great number, in fact, practically all of the adults that we captured had regenerated tails. Now, in the past, in the course of handling some few thousand alligators, I have seen only about 3 with regenerated tails, and yet more than 50% of the adult caiman that we caught in this particular section had lost part of their tail, which is common. Most crocodilians do not attain adulthood with all of their tail. They lose part of it before they grow up. But most cases, they lose the end of the tail, it heals over, and they have a stumpy or a short tail. The unusual thing about these particular members was the fact that they had regrown the tail in a high percentage of cases. Now, one of the specimens that we caught here had lost a leg, and apparently only very recently. This particular specimen, by the way, was released. He was put back into a sack momentarily, and a few hours later taken back and released into the swamp. Although he would recover, he was not a useful specimen as far as we were concerned. Now, upon the day that we encountered this boa here, or rather that the native encountered him and became involved with him, we brought him back to the little airstrip that's being used as the operations headquarters for the dusting and the planting of the crops, the rice that's grown on this particular plantation. And Roy dumped the boa out in order to look him over a little better here. Incidentally, this was one of the largest boas that I have ever encountered anywhere in Latin America. Although the great majority of these boys were not willing to lay hands on a snake, most of them were not afraid of the caiman, and the success of this operation depended to a great extent upon the cooperation that we received from them.
Arthur, the first half of Capture was just great this week, and I can't wait till the second half, and I know you can't either. We'll be back in just a moment with Arthur Jones and more of Capture. Well, after seeing the first portion of the program today, I'm sure you're looking forward, just as I am, to the second half. And Arthur, you promised us an exciting conclusion. Where are we going?
In the second half of this week's film in Suriname, Bill, we take you into another part of the country, into the northeastern section near the village of Albina. And I believe that on this trip, we made films of what are probably the most unusual native people, or perhaps I should call them semi-native people, now living anywhere on the South American continent. The bush Negroes. They are the more or less remnants or survivors of slaves that were brought into this area of the world several hundred years ago, and upon being liberated, they went back into the bush and reverted completely to a wild, tribal African life. And to this day, they live exactly as they did hundreds or perhaps even thousands of years in the past.
I think that's wonderful, and I'm sure it will be just great. Let's join Arthur Jones again on Capture.
Once our project in catching and housebreaking, more or less, the caiman in the area of Waganigan, Suriname, was well underway. As I mentioned, Bill, we were interested in obtaining several hundred of these adults, from which we would select anywhere between 150 and 300 to be brought to this country to sell in Florida. And once this project was well underway, then we set out to more or less look over the rest of the country from Paramaribo east, west, and south, the idea being to discover other types of animals that could be economically, feasibly removed from other sections of the country. Now, one of the advantages in the country of Suriname, or Dutch Guiana, is the fact that most of the transportation there is either by boat or by airplane. They do have an unusually large number of usable airstrips scattered pretty well all over the country. This is due to the fact that the roads in the country, because of the rainy season and the more or less consistency of the soil and the resulting mud that makes it almost impossible to drive during the rainy season. This, by the way, was a dry season. And in the rainy season, the roads are so bad that it's almost impossible to move around on land. And therefore, the only way to get around is by airplane or by boat. Well, in our case, this is a great advantage because it has resulted in a large number of airports being established in areas that otherwise probably wouldn't have airports. Now, north, or rather south of the little town of Albina, on the northeastern corner, near the coast and along the river separating Dutch Guiana from French Guiana, we visited the village of a Bush Negro tribe. These are people that originally were brought over from Africa some few hundred years ago as slaves, then were liberated and immediately went back to their native life exactly as they lived it in Africa a period of centuries ago. Now, these people are completely primitive in every word. In fact, it's difficult today to find people living in Africa under the conditions as primitive as those practiced by the South American Bush Negroes. And upon this occasion, we were fortunate enough to be able to film for the first time, to my knowledge, for television or for any other reason for that matter, a ceremony practiced by these people called the fire dance. Now, some of these customs have come over from Africa, and some have been developed in South America among the Bush Negroes living there today. And frankly, I'm not familiar enough with their history to tell you whether or not this practice, as demonstrated here in a moment, is a carryover from Africa, or if it is something learned by the American, or rather by the Bush Negroes from the American Indians living in the same region. Incidentally, this man at the moment is eating a glass, drinking glass. Now, when I say eating, he is not swallowing it, but he will take a glass, a beer bottle, or any reasonably thin and fairly easily broken piece of glass, bite it off and chew it up, and then grind the pieces down almost to the consistency of sand in his mouth, and then spit these out into his hand, and apparently without any damage. You'll notice a semi-close-up of his tongue here. There's no blood at all evident in his hand. Now, the real purpose of this is frankly beyond me, but the fire dance is a demonstration, probably for the purpose of controlling other members of the tribe, as is usually the case with most of these primitive ceremonies. They use not only the eating of glass and the applying of hot swords to the base of their feet, but the real height of the fire dance, of course, is just exactly that, dancing into and among and on hot coals. Now, by the way, if you think that there is any trick involved in this, I would be more than glad to have you try to demonstrate it to me, because we were there, we examined the people, we saw the fire, and never having done this, and of course I don't want to do it, I really have no idea exactly how they're able to do it, because the fire is hot, the coals are literally glowing red hot. They do place them next to their skin, and apparently no damage is done. I cannot offer an explanation for it. Obviously there is one, but at the time we went rather into great detail here attempting to find an easily explainable answer to the ability these people demonstrate, and we encountered nothing that we could satisfactorily explain their ability to withstand damage from fire. This is, by the way, much more impressive when done at night. of the largest and certainly the most beautiful animals that I have personally ever encountered in South America was this jaguar that we caught in central Suriname. Now, at a later date, we will have a film in this series showing the hunt for and the capture of this particular animal. And by the way, because of the length of this episode, Bill, we will not have a promo of next week's show. But I do promise that next week's show will be one you will not forget.
Arthur, that was a great climax to a wonderful adventure on Capture this week, wasn't it? But don't go away. In just a few moments, we'll be back with Arthur and our live guest on Capture. Once in a while, and I say once in a while because it is once in a great while, Arthur brings one of our live guests in, which I will immediately take into my hand and trustingly say I'll hold it. I've done it. So far, I'm satisfied, Arthur. But they are beautiful specimens, but they're odd-looking. What are they?
These are Mexican or southern Texas, actually, collared lizards. They're found from the extreme southern part of the Rio Grande Valley section of Texas, from Laredo to Brownsville, and then that section and southward for a couple hundred miles into Mexico. These are collected in quite large numbers, incidentally, by Raymond Johnson of Laredo, one of our associates in that section of the country. And although this particular type of so-called collared lizard is rather unique, the collared lizard in one form or another is found pretty well throughout the Southwest. As a child, I collected these in Oklahoma and northern Texas, and, or rather, I collected the collared lizard of that area, which was greatly different from these particular ones. And at the present time, Bill, these are being sold in 5 and 10 cent stores and pet shops throughout the United States in rather large numbers. In fact, about 3,000 or 4,000 a week at the present moment. Incidentally, these are collected in largest numbers in the cold weather time of the year. They find these in rather large groups huddled up to get away from the cold. When they have a norther in that section of Texas, they go out, and in a day's time, sometimes a good hunter can collect 200 or 300 of these.
What would I feed this lizard if I had him as a pet?
Well, if you had that one as a pet, which I've already promised you, as I recall, you can feed him mealworms or any type of insect, or for that matter, small chunks of meat. Now, in the wild state, of course, they feed primarily upon other small animals, of course, mainly insects that they're able to capture.
Well, they are beautiful, Art, and very unique and very spiny. I have a feeling they are spiny.
If you run your finger the wrong way up his back there, you'll notice that the scales are extremely sharp.
Art, our show is running a little long this week, so I know we won't have time for the usual preview of next week's adventure. But I know from what you've said, we can all look forward to our next appearance of Capture.